scrolling, binge watching, emotional eating, procrastinating, feeling overwhelmed, over functioning, snapping at people that you love. These are just a fraction of the negative automatic behaviors that anxiety can end up causing you to do. If you're doing any of these, or if anxiety is causing you to engage in any negative and destructive behaviors that you're having a tough time figuring out how to correct, this is exactly the training that you've been waiting for. The reason I share that is because over the past 8 years, I've been working with people with anxiety professionally, helping them overcome or at least dramatically reduce their anxiety when traditional therapy, medication, or coping mechanisms have not been enough. I've learned that most people are trying to go after the business of changing their behaviors totally wrong, and in a way that takes about 10 times way more effort than it actually needs to. It's actually way easier to correct a negative, disempowering behavior that's being fueled by anxiety or some other type of emotional issue. You just have to make sure that you're actually addressing the source of the problem. If you're joining with us live, go ahead and let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me, and let me know in the comments what your particular negative behavior is that you would like some assistance with, and I'll be happy to chime in with some recommendations, but chances are we'll cover it tonight. Here's what I got planned for you. Number one, I'm going to show you something that we call the thought cycle. It's a 4-step process that helps you understand why you do what you do, and why trying to change, I should say, what you do is actually a very fruitless endeavor, because trying to change what you do before you change these other two things as a part of the thought cycle don't help you at all, and they actually are basically just wasting all of your time and your energy. Next, I'm going to share with you 3 specific hacks that I've learned in the past 8 years of working with people who've got anxiety and destructive behaviors that will make the entire process of changing your behavior so much easier. These are pretty much the fastest, simplest, but yet most effective and long-lasting tools and practices that I still default to. And I also use them on myself whenever I notice I'm slipping into a pattern that I don't like and I want to change. It works with things in your career, your relationships, with improving your physical health and fitness, making better financial decisions, any type of corrective behavior, these systems will work. And then I'm going to finish by helping you understand the nature of why certain patterns of behavior become basically addictive, how to make sure that you can actually break that addiction, and how you can actually create what we call positive addictions. In other words, you can get your nervous system addicted to positive behaviors that actually make you feel fulfilled. Okay, so first of all, let's cover something that we call the thought cycle. Now, I learned this working with people who had alcoholism and addiction years ago in the beginning of my career. And those may not be the exact issues that you're dealing with, but I share that with you because I want you to understand that even in a situation where your brain and your body has developed a literal physical dependency and addiction to a substance. In other words, your entire biology is trying to compel you to engage in a behavior. This particular tool and framework I'm going to walk you through can even correct something as serious as that. I developed this when I was working with people who had been in and out of rehab, or they had tried getting sober multiple times and they had always relapsed. And basically they hired me to try to figure out, well, what is it that's going on? Why am I relapsing, and what do I need to do to make sure that I stop this? And what I learned was that almost all behavior adjustment tools and processes out there, whether you go and talk to a traditional therapist, or you go to, in their extreme case, obviously a rehab center, but if you're dealing with a more mundane, everyday type of negative behavior, you're obviously not going to go into rehab, unless maybe you've got a gambling addiction or something like that. But regardless, there's therapy, and then there's rehab centers and things like that, but basically they're doing some version of talk therapy there too. But regardless, what I've found is that what most people do is one of two things. They either will try to focus on the behavior. So in other words, they try to muster a bunch of willpower to try to break the behavior and to try to correct a new behavior in its place. And I'm sure you can kind of relate to that. Chances are, if you're here, you're watching this, you're listening to this, there's a behavior that you want to change. Chances are you've tried the nut up and shut up approach, right? Just trying to put your boots on and use a bunch of willpower and get yourself to break the cycle. Sometimes that works, most times it doesn't, because it's not taking into account the thought cycle. The other type of strategy and approach that tends to happen is what I call like light acceptance slash coping behavior. So basically, there's a whole school of thought out there that says, hey, just like let it be okay. It's all right that you're, doing this destructive thing that you really don't want to be doing. And sure, like some level of self-acceptance is good. We should accept certain things that we cannot control. But when it comes to changing negative behaviors, that is definitely something we can control. We just got to understand the science behind it. So what is the thought cycle? Well, I'm going to explain it to you. If you have the ability to take some notes, I would recommend it. It'll be nice, short, sweet, and simple and to the point. Here's what you'd want to do. You'd want to draw on a piece of paper one big box, something that takes up at least a half of the sheet of paper or the full sheet. And then you want to divide that box into 4 boxes. Okay, the top left box is going to be box number 1. Top right box is going to be box number 2. Bottom right box is going to be box number 3. Bottom left box is going to be box number 4. So basically moving in a clockwise fashion. If you're just listening to this and you're driving or whatever, it's okay. Just imagine it in your mind. 4 boxes. Okay. And so think of the negative behavior that it is that you want to change. Either just say it out loud so you have a specific one in mind, because this whole training will go a lot easier and more effective for you if you have a particular behavior in mind that you want to change. And then if you're joining with us live or you're watching the replay, just go ahead and let me know in the comments. What is the behavior that you want to change? I will say that the typical ones that my clients are wanting to change are, number 1, spending too much time, in their mind, spending too much time consuming negative media, as in, they're just basically kind of numbing themselves. They're not really, enriching their lives. Number 2, some other form of distraction that isn't necessarily media. For example, we call this straightening the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, right? So you got some big important thing you really need to be doing, but instead you go and distract yourself with pretending to be productive by fixing something else that you feel is going to be way easier for you to be successful at. Third would be breaking kind of the media thing down. You've got watching too much TV or doom scrolling on social media or consuming just media that angers you and makes you upset, things of that nature. Number 4, common one is relationship behaviors. So having a short fuse with your kids or your partner, getting snappy with other people. Or if you're dealing with anxiety, it is very often a pattern of avoidance. So you avoid driving across town, you avoid going out in public, you avoid having that tough conversation with your boss, you avoid confronting your friend when they hurt your feelings, things like that. So it can be an avoidant type behavior. It could also be oversleeping, overeating, emotionally eating, or it could be using some type of substance of some kind. Okay, that's not a fully exhaustive list, but that usually covers about 90% of it. So let me know what your example is below, okay? I see a couple entries coming in, so thank you for that. So here's the problem. Think about what that behavior is, okay? And what most people do, like I said, is they just focus on the behavior. So like I said, my clients who were dealing with alcohol or drug issues, they'd go to rehab, and what would a rehab center do? They would first of all try to dry the person out. In other words, they would get them sober, and they would keep them sober. So they try to break the physical dependence on the substance, which is a good step in the right direction. And then they basically would do pretty much only that. They would put them in kind of a coping mechanism type of environment, but they wouldn't really address a couple other elements. So here's the key thing to understand. Box number 3 is the behavior. Okay, so in other words, we've got box number 1, top left, box number 2, top right. Bottom right box is box number 3. That represents the behavior. What I learned with those clients is that the behavior was not the start of the cycle. The behavior was basically towards the end of the cycle, that there were 2 key things that were generating the negative behaviors. And if we just use willpower as a sort of short-term duration motivator to try to break the pattern off, or if we try to artificially put ourselves in an environment that's not going to support the behavior, that's good, that'll work for the short term because now we're attacking the behavior head on. The problem is it's not addressing what actually fuels the behavior, and so relapse is almost inevitable. So what is it that fuels the behavior? Well, what I learned is that my clients were only engaging in those negative behaviors when they got into certain emotional states. And that's what goes in box number 2, okay, is emotion / feeling. So you've got behavior as the 3rd item in the cycle. The second item that happens immediately before that is there's a particular emotion or feeling that generates the behavior. What I learned working with people who had alcoholism or drug addiction was they only went for their substance when they were in a particular emotional state. So it could be overwhelmed, stressed, angry, sad, depressed. I think I said anxious already. Okay, it could be, those are the very common ones. It could be, I suppose, something else, maybe confused or something. But I guarantee you, if you're going to a regular behavior that you do not like, it is because you're getting into a negative emotional state consistently. And you only feel the urge to go and do that behavior more than likely when you're in that emotional state. And so in a very real way, your nervous system has an addiction to the emotion on top of the behavior. It's really the addiction to the emotion that's generating the urge for the behavior. So what I learned, and this is, stick with me because this is really important, rather than you focusing on your behavior, here's what I learned. When I had alcoholic clients, I didn't even tell them to stop drinking. I didn't even tell them to reduce their drinking. I didn't even work on the behavior itself at all. All I did was I helped them make sure that they broke the habit of experiencing the regular emotion that was fueling the behavior. And what that ended up doing was it ended up starving the behavior of the fuel. Okay? That's basically what you need to do. So it's like taking the gas out of the car. The car won't go anymore. In order for you to have that negative behavior, you have to have the fuel of the emotion that's driving it. If we break your nervous system's addiction to going into that habitual set of emotions, you will no longer have that same urge to engage in the negative behavior. I promise you that. So think of it this way. Think of that behavior that you want to change. Isn't it true that you only engage in that negative behavior when you get into certain emotional states? In other words, you probably don't go do that negative behavior when you're feeling happy, right? It's not the same thing. When you're feeling light and joyous and peaceful, you probably don't engage in that same exact behavior. And by the way, this is probably part of why you want to change the behavior, because you feel icky whenever you do the behavior, and you feel icky about it because you're doing it from a negative state. In other words, the behavior is an escape from the emotional state. So if we change the dominant emotional state that you are in, we no longer have an environment that you feel like you need to escape from. Does that make sense to you? And it also means that whatever behaviors you might be engaging in that you currently find are tanking your self-esteem. So for example, a lot of times people will say watch a bunch of TV, or they'll play video games, or they'll drink, or they'll smoke, or whatever. And there's a difference between doing it where it uplifts you and makes you happy, and then doing it where it just numbs you, and then in the long term it crushes your self-esteem. And when you do it in a way that numbs you and crushes your self-esteem, you're always doing it because you're trying to escape a negative emotional state. If you're actually in a positive emotional state and then you go drink or smoke or play games or whatever, it feels totally, totally different, right? And so the cool thing about this is we're not just trying to change the behavior, we're actually tracing our steps further and further back to the real source of the problem. So the key thing you want to understand is, what is your emotional center of gravity? Okay, we call that the ECOG, your emotional center of gravity. You want to pinpoint that. So what is the number one, actually, what's the dominant number one emotional state that you tend to experience? And that is going to fuel most of your behaviors. But here's the interesting thing. That begs the question, how do we actually change the dominant emotional state that you experience, right? Because if it were that easy, right, we would snap our fingers, we'd make that happen. Well, there's one thing that fuels your dominant emotional state more than anything else, which is what goes in box number one. And this is the whole thing that kicks off the entire cycle. And that is a thought or a belief. So in other words, you fire off a particular thought, excuse me, you fire off a particular thought or a series of thoughts. And what that does is it immediately generates a particular emotional response in your nervous system. When you are in that particular emotional response, you then feel that you need to escape the emotion through your negative behavior. And then the fourth and final piece of the thought cycle is that those behaviors end up creating what we call a result. Okay, so if we use emotional eating, for example, here's what will typically happen. Someone has a really stressful day. Something triggers them, stresses them out. They don't know how to process it in a way that doesn't create anxiety. They've got, let's just call it bad mental hygiene. It's not their fault. Maybe they're just maybe at the beginning of their recovery process. They don't have the tools. They don't understand. But I guarantee you there's between 3 and 6 key thoughts and beliefs that you keep repeating to yourself regularly that then trigger your negative emotional state. And then when you're in that negative emotional state, it then causes you to engage in that negative escapist behavior. That negative escapist behavior then creates a series of results. So a classic example, like the people I worked with many years ago, and well, I still work with them now, but when I first learned this, let's say it's alcoholism. So they might have had a thought or belief like, oh my gosh, today was a tough day. I just need a break, right? I just need to relax. Or they might, or it could get even more sinister. They might have thoughts or beliefs like, what's it matter? What's the point? Okay, things like that. That type of thinking will then create a certain feeling. The feeling is going to be things like anger, sadness, depressed, apathy, okay? And then you're going to look for an escape from that, which is cool. Let's just turn our brain off. Let's go turn the TV on. Let's watch something ridiculous. Let's drink. Let's do whatever we want to do. And then over here, that creates a particular result, which is maybe the problem that needs to get dealt with doesn't really get resolved. Maybe the internal inner work that really needs to happen gets avoided and procrastinated on. Maybe the conversation you need to go and have to deal with the real issue gets avoided, okay? I've done this more times than I can count because this is the thing, it's subconscious, right? And so explaining it helps you become more aware of it. And one of the common things I'll do with clients is I will literally have them map out on their notes these 4 boxes, and I'll say, cool, what's your behavior? Boom, we'll knock that in there. And then I'll say, what's the emotions driving it? We'll fill that in. And then we ask the pivotal question, which is number 1, what do you say to yourself regularly that makes you feel that way? And if they cannot readily identify some answers to that, then I'll ask them, what would you have to believe in order to keep feeling those feelings that you're experiencing? So if they say depressed and anxious, and they don't know exactly what dialogue is running through their mind when they feel anxious and depressed, I'll say, okay, well, what would you have to believe to be feeling that anxious at work? What would you have to believe in order to feel that depressed when you're around your friends? And what that ends up doing is it helps us pluck the negative subconscious belief out of the back of the brain, put it out on paper, and then now we actually have something that we can shift, we can change, we can adjust. Okay, it's a very powerful process. Also, little note, by the way, if you would like, I'm happy to send over our Eliminating Limiting Beliefs worksheet that we give to our clients. Okay, if you'd like a free copy of that, just go ahead and type belief worksheet in the comments below, and we'll send a copy to anybody who requests that this week. Because that then gives you something tangible where once you identify the thoughts and beliefs that are generating the negative feelings and behaviors, etc., you can actually work through it and process those, because just becoming intellectually aware of it is not sufficient, okay? So this is the thought cycle. If you got a negative behavior, you need to map out your own version of the thought cycle. Another free gift for you, by the way, if it would help any of you, we offer a completely, totally free mental health coaching session to anybody in our community that would benefit from it. You just simply need to either type the word session below this video if you're watching with us live or on the replay, or you can go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. There's no catch, no pitch, none of that. It's just, I can help you. I can help speed up this process. I can map out this thought cycle for you. I can help you make sure you really pinpoint the real source of the problem. So if you want to speed this up, then I'm happy to help you out. Okay, enough of that. End of the commercial break. Let's now go to the remainder of the training. So we know now we got to identify the real source of the problem. You got to do that with the thought cycle. Now let's talk about how you can actually structurally change the automatic behaviors that you have in your daily life and make it feel very, very effortless. Which, by the way, here's the really cool thing. Once I helped my clients pinpoint what the dominant thoughts and beliefs were that were causing them to feel those feelings and causing them to drink or use drugs or whatever their negative behavior was, I then just helped them eliminate those limiting beliefs. Because, by the way, this is a little secret for you, the source of all emotional pain, including anxiety, is subconscious beliefs that are not identified properly or not eliminated properly. And so here's the cool thing. I helped them figure out what they were. I helped them eliminate those beliefs. And then I didn't even have to tell them to stop drinking. I didn't even have to tell them to stop using drugs. This one gentleman, he was literally addicted to methamphetamine. Okay, it's a very serious addiction. We changed his beliefs. That changed his emotional center of gravity. And over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, he literally just dropped his usage systematically, week by week by week. By month, or by week 5, he had been clean, totally clean, right? And he's still been clean ever since. This was 6 years ago. So it works. Okay, this process really, really works because we deal with the source of the problem. By the way, it also explains why when he went to rehab 4 times before, it didn't work. Why? Because he went to rehab. They got him off of the drug. They kept him away from the drug. They broke the physical addiction. Then they released him. He goes back out into the world, but he goes back out into the world and he keeps thinking the same thoughts. He keeps believing the same beliefs. Therefore, he then generates the same feelings. Therefore, it's just a matter of time before he goes back to what he knows is going to give him an escape. And I know that that's an extreme example. You might not be able to identify with that because chances are the vast majority of you guys have not taken methamphetamine. But whatever your thing is, I promise you this exact same cycle is working in the same way. Okay? So you want to do this. This is step 1. Map out your thought cycle and eliminate the limiting beliefs that are generating the whole cycle. That's step number 1. You do that, you're 80% of the way there. Okay? The rest of these things I'm going to tell you are just things to make it easy, simple, more automatic, and more long-lasting, okay? This next tool is what we call if-then planning. So here's how it works. Your brain works by patterns and scripts. In other words, your brain basically wants to go with the lowest common denominator, okay? This is why, have you ever noticed that this negative behavior of yours is something that you almost do just totally automatically? Like you're not even conscious that you're doing it? Like maybe you said to yourself, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop eating so many sweets after dinner or something like that. Then all of a sudden you finish dinner and you're reaching into the candy drawer and you're eating sweets and then you're 2 bites in and you go, what the hell am I doing? I said I was going to, cut back on this. So if you have ever found yourself in that experience where you're engaged in the negative behavior and you are like, what the hell? I didn't even mean to do that. The reason why that's happening is because your behaviors will sink to the level of your current conditioning. They will not rise to the level of your ambitions or dreams. And what that means is just wanting the behavior to change is not enough. Just wanting it to change will only ensure that your brain goes back to what it is automatically conditioned to do and what it's been reinforced to do over and over and over again. Because as much as we like to think that we're really that much more sophisticated, we're all basically Pavlov's dogs, right? So if you have, after dinner, reached into the candy drawer, eaten some candy, and you've done that dozens or hundreds of times or whatever, your brain has gotten a very strong positive reinforcement loop. And so it takes a little bit of effort in order to make sure that we break through that. Now, if you go through the limiting beliefs thing, that's going to take care of the vast majority of it. But the next thing that we need to do is we need to install a new default script in the brain. So here's how that works. You want to write down this phrase. Okay, the phrase that you want to write down is, when X occurs, don't do Y, do Z instead. Okay? When X occurs, don't do Y, do Z instead. Okay, that's the key phrase that you want to write down. Now, X represents the trigger. Okay, that's the thing that starts the entire loop of the pattern of behavior in the first place. Y represents the old negative pattern of behavior that you are breaking. Z represents the replacement. So there's a couple of principles behind this. First of all, your brain is wired this exact way. When X occurs, do Y. When X occurs, do Y. When X occurs, do Y. So your brain links things together. That's what the brain does. That's part of why humans are so smart, because we can make lots of connections and we can link this concept to that concept. But it shortchanges us because our brain is so good at linking things together, it creates habits that sometimes shortchange us. So there's a trigger that immediately spurs the negative pattern of behavior. So what you've got to do is you need to make sure that you train the brain on what you're going to replace that behavior with. So think of it like a chain. So your brain has got like links in a chain. When X occurs, that's the first link of the chain, do Y, that's the second link of the chain. So what we've got to do is we want to basically introduce a third link into the chain. So that way, when this whole sequence gets kicked off in our brain, we now train the brain that we're not going to end on the second link, we're actually going to end on the third link. Because next time X occurs, your brain's going to go, hey, X occurred, I just finished dinner, it's time to go get some candy. But you'll have now created an if-then plan that you'll have conditioned your brain to use instead. So your brain will go, oh, that's right, dinner just got over. Oh, but wait a minute, instead of eating candy, what I'm actually going to do is go have a piece of fresh fruit. Okay? And what this ends up doing is it breaks the pattern. It ends up creating a new reinforcement loop, because this is a little secret of behavioral change. You can't effectively get rid of one addiction unless you replace it with a new addiction that actually is more positive and empowering for you. Okay, that's a key thing. And that whole example, by the way, of getting rid of sweets and replacing it with fruit, I've used that many times with clients who are wanting to engage in weight loss. So you just pick whatever the thing is that's actually going to help you out. With alcohol, I've used I've had clients, I just will ask clients like, hey, what do you want to do instead of going and having a drink? And they'll pick anything from having a cup of tea, meditating, reading a chapter of a book, going for a walk, okay, whatever. There's no wrong answer. It's just that you need some sort of behavior that's going to boost your self-esteem that you can attach to the old trigger. And what you want to do is you want to make however many if-then plans you need. So the way that I usually like to do this with a client, okay, is you'll want to basically create 3 columns. Okay, and the simplest thing to identify is the why portion. So in other words, what is the old negative behavior that you want to replace this with? So we basically make it look like this, 3 columns, X, Y, Z. You start with why. What are the negative patterns and behaviors that you want to get rid of? And you could write down 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. But you want to start with the ones that are going to make the biggest boost in your mental health, right, and your overall quality of life. So let's just say it's the eating sweets thing, right? So we write here, eating sweets in column Y. Okay, the next thing you do after you've identified the negative behaviors is you go and you say, okay, what is the thing that immediately precedes that behavior, which is the X? So in the case of this hypothetical example, but it's also reminding me of a client I had years ago, it was finishing dinner. Okay, so I finish, dinner is in the X column, eating sweets is in the Y column, there we go. And then Z now is going to be eating some fruit. Okay, so we then put it all together. Now we say, next time I finish dinner, don't eat sweets, instead eat a piece of fruit. Now, that process basically gives your brain a very, very specific script to follow, and now you're probably about 10 times more likely to actually follow through and make it happen. Let me give you one other example to show the power of this. Very often a thing that people struggle with is diet and exercise. I just gave a diet example, let me give an exercise example. Very often what people will do is they'll say something to themselves like, you know what, I really need to start working out. Which, by the way, if we go back to the thought cycle, you telling yourself, I really need to start working out, probably creates a very low level emotion like shame and guilt. And shame and guilt is going to create the behavior of avoidance, distraction, and indulging in unhealthy behaviors, right? So you need a thought or belief like, I can, I will, this is happening, we're doing this now, this is going to be good, I'm committing to this, I'm taking this seriously, okay? You need different language that creates the feeling of certainty, confidence, commitment that then results in the behavior. So that's one little side note. But regardless, here's what a lot of people will do. They will actually have the intention to go work out, right? They will have all of the good intentions, and let me know in the comments if this has ever been you. You wake up, you're like, you know what? Today is the day, right? I'm gonna actually do this thing. Or better yet, you'll probably say tomorrow is the day, right? So you'll say, all right, tomorrow's the day. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to set my alarm 30 minutes earlier. I'm going to go into the basement. I'm going to take the clothes off of the exercise bike. I'm going to actually exercise for 30 minutes. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Then what happens? You wake up the next day and you wake up and you're tired, and your brain has learned, oh, when we wake up and we're tired, we snooze. So you click the little snooze button. So what you did is you didn't properly create the plan. You didn't properly create the script in your head. And that's why your brain went into the old script. Remember what I said, your brain will always go to the lowest common denominator. It will go to the pattern that it is currently most conditioned to go to. So in order to use a conditioning mechanism, very different than a coping mechanism, what we want to do is we want to introduce an if-then plan. If X occurs, don't do Y, do Z instead. So that would look like, when I wake up in the morning and I feel tired, don't hit snooze. Instead, get up immediately, go downstairs, and bike for 30 minutes. Okay, I guarantee you that person who says that to themselves and who also writes it down and maybe even puts their written plan on their bedside table next to them so that way they have to look at it and read it, okay, they are way, 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 way more likely to actually follow through. So it's just a process. It works. There's science behind it. I'm not going to bore you with all the science. It works. If-then planning just works. Okay. Now here's another example of hacking your brain. This is the next tool I'm going to teach you. It's called the habit hook. This is another good way to replace a negative behavior with a positive behavior, but actually it's really, really good for just introducing a positive behavior. So it works in very much in the similar sort of way. But let's say there's something that you've been wanting to do. You're not trying to change a negative behavior per se, but now you're trying to introduce a positive behavior, and you want it to just become automatic. You want to take it from being something you kind of do some of the time to being something you do all the time. Well, what you need to do is just simply pick something that you already do all the time, and then do that thing that you want to do immediately after you do the thing that you currently automatically do without thinking about it. Okay, now here's why this works. There's two systems of thinking in your brain. There's what's called system A thinking, and then there's what's called system B thinking. So the best example I could give you of this is, say like your typical drive to work, or for those of you who work from home, just think of like somewhere you drive to regularly, your grocery store or something like that. When you go and drive to work or the grocery store, your brain is using system B thinking. In other words, you don't even have to think about it, right? You just drive, and you could be talking to somebody else, you could be listening to a podcast, you could be listening to music, singing along, you could be planning your day, you could be figuring out what you're going to cook for dinner, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're at the grocery store and you're like, oh, I don't even remember driving here. And that's because it's system B thinking. It's become automatic. It's a conditioned pattern. Your mind already has strung together exactly what to do when you get to this intersection and that intersection, da da da. It's just a series of combinations of if-then plans that your brain has strung together. But let's say it's the very first day of a brand new job, and or you moved houses and now you got to get to the grocery store a different kind of way or something. And when you get to a particular intersection, you're really used to going right, but you're supposed to go left, and so you find yourself going right, okay, because your system B thinking is kicking in. Okay, that's system B thinking. System A thinking is when you're coming up to that intersection that you typically turn right at, and you have to tell yourself, hey, 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 we got to turn left here, not right. Right? Remember, we got to turn left. Okay, so in other words, system A thinking is when it's top of mind, it's front and center, it's something you've got to be mindful of, you've got to be aware of it. Okay, and the whole goal with behavioral change, by the way, is to take system A thinking and move it into system B thinking. So one of the ways that you can do this is you can kind of hack the brain by taking something that it already has in system B. So for most people, by the way, the example I always use is brushing your teeth. For the majority of human beings, there's 1 or 2 times a day where you brush your teeth pretty much automatically, like right after you eat breakfast or right before you go to bed or whatever it is. So what you'd want to do, let's say there's that thing you want to do, like, I don't know, use the daily conditioning questions that we give out to our community, or whatever kind of little mental tool you want to use. Go meditate for 10 minutes. I don't know. Whatever the thing is that you want to do, you brush your teeth, and then you go do that thing immediately. And by the way, here's how you can combine these things. Create an if-then plan in advance. So you say, okay, next time I brush my teeth, don't just immediately go to bed. brush my teeth, and then go meditate for 10 minutes, and then go to bed. Right? So you give your brain a very specific plan of what to do and when to do it, and then you make sure that that plan is automatically going to get initiated by something that happens every single day by default already. Okay, this works like gangbusters. It works really, really, really well. Okay, especially with the tiny stuff that adds up into the big stuff. Okay, so that's the habit hook, works really well. Here's my next tip for you. Okay, for optimal results, you want to pick one, maximum two behaviors to change per week. Okay, especially if you're going to be doing this on your own, and if you're not going to be like addressing the real underlying root of the anxiety, which, by the way, you really should do that because that'll just make your life way easier. Instead of trying to trim all the branches on a tree that's annoying you, it's better to just chop the trunk down, right? So in the same way, why don't we just deal with the anxiety that's causing all these negative behaviors in the first place? But regardless, if you want to go the route of trying to change every little tiny behavior, you will get best results if you focus on only one, but ideally, no more than two behaviors per week. Why? Because system A thinking versus system B thinking. Remember that? Your brain can only handle so much in system A thinking. So it's better to focus on one thing, turn it into a new habit, feel the pride and the self-esteem boost of having already made that new positive habit. Let that one habit go from system A thinking to system B thinking, and then start working on a new habit in system A thinking. Think of it like a conveyor belt. Okay, so you can change lots and lots of different behaviors, but if you try to jam 10 boxes on the conveyor belt at once, they're all going to fall off, and none of them are really going to sustainably move to the next system. So if you focus on one for about 7 to 14 days until it's habituated, then you can move on to the next one. And that's how you can slowly change your entire life. And that's how, over the course of a 12-month period, you can make 30 to 52 different adjustments that change your life. And that's how you can have a very, very different life in 12 months compared to how it is currently. How cool is that? Here's my final thing I'm going to share with you. I'm going to walk through why patterns and behaviors become addictive. And these are really, really powerful things to keep in mind for creating new, positive, addictive behaviors that will actually serve you in the long run. Because remember what I said before, if you want to make sure you get rid of a negative, limiting behavior, you need to replace it with a new behavior, but not just any new behavior. You need to replace it with a new behavior that meets your 6 needs in a similar or higher way than your old one did. Okay, what does that mean? What are the 6 needs? Definitely write this down or commit this to memory. There are 6 needs that drive all human thought and behavior. Every thought you have, every behavior that you do in your life is aimed at trying to accomplish one or more of these 6 things. I promise you, I guarantee it, check it, try it out for yourself, okay? Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I've never had it happen in 8 years. Okay, here they are. Number 1, the drive for certainty / comfort. Okay, so we all desire to feel some level of certain and in control or comfort, so to feel a sense of predictability, to feel that we know what's going to happen next, to feel a sense of safety, okay? All of those are synonyms for wanting to feel certain. Okay, if you ever find yourself getting anxious because things don't go according to plan, that's because you're craving certainty. If you find yourself getting anxious because there's sensations going on in your body that you don't understand, that's because, again, you're craving certainty. So certainty is one of the profound needs that we have in our nervous system. And if you're not careful, you'll have a bunch of negative thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that reinforce that need for certainty, like anxiety, that doesn't help you. It shortchanges you. The second need we have is the need for variety or uncertainty. Okay, because if you just did the same certain thing over and over and over again, you'd drive yourself nuts, right? So if any of those negative behaviors you came here trying to change are the ones that you're dealing with, you're doing some of those because it gives you a sense of certainty. Why do people doom scroll? Because it makes them forget about their to-do list, right? So it gives them this delusion of comfort and certainty. Same thing with, watching more TV than they believe they should, or same thing with consuming alcohol or drugs. It creates this artificial sense of control and certainty and comfort, even though in the long run, it shortchanges them. Okay, number 2 is for variety. Basically anything that changes your state. So again, Think of those same exact things I just said. Why do we go from feeling stressed and overwhelmed to then consuming media that calms us down or makes us laugh? It's to create a state change, to create a change of state. Okay, using substances, again, as a way to create a change of state. Snapping at your partner changes your state. Having a short fuse with your kids changes your state. Oversleeping is a way to escape a negative state. Okay, these are all different things that change your state. The third need we have is to feel good enough. Okay, and people have different definitions of this, but it's usually like unique, special, talented, successful, pretty, whatever. Some sort of measurement that you think you have to measure up to, perfect, thinking you have to please other people, something like that. Okay, so we very often will engage in behaviors because they still make us feel to some degree good enough or significant, or they at least temporarily distract us from the thoughts that we're having that are causing us to feel horribly insignificant and not good enough. So very often, one client is coming to mind who had a drinking issue. One of the things was like all of his friends were drinkers, right? He would go out Wednesdays and Thursdays, or Wednesdays and Fridays, I don't remember, but he would go out and drink with them. And so he was worried that if he quit the alcohol, he would lose significance with his friend group. That's a real thing, right? That's part of what creates addiction, is this desire to feel significant and good enough. The fourth one is the desire for connection and love. That example I just gave is also a good example of how it would become even more addictive, right? He was drinking, the drinking made him feel certain, made him feel more in control of his life, gave him a state change, gave him variety, helped him feel significant and good enough, helped him feel connected to other people. Okay, that's plenty more than is necessary to create an addiction right there. All you need is three things, three of them, 3 out of 6, and you got an addiction. He had 4. Okay, number 5, the fifth need is the need for growth. The sixth need is the need to feel that you're contributing beyond yourself. The fifth and the sixth ones are the ones that we rarely actually tap into. Those ones are kind of optional, but they lead to the most fulfillment, growth, and contribution. The first 4, okay, certainty, variety, feeling good enough, and then connection, love. Those 4 we find a way to meet no matter what, whether it is positive, negative, or horribly destructive. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is you need to ask yourself, think about that negative behavior you came into this training with, and ask yourself, when you engage in that negative behavior, how certain and comfortable do you feel when you're engaged in that behavior? Right? Like how much of a sense of certainty and comfort, 0 to 10, does it make you feel? Then secondly, how much of a sense of variety and change of state do you get from engaging in that behavior, 0 to 10? Third, how significant do you feel or good enough do you feel, 0 to 10? Okay, fourth, how much of a sense of connection do you feel to other people, 0 to 10? How much of a sense of growth does it give you, 0 to 10? How much of a sense of contribution does it give you, 0 to 10? And here's what I would guarantee you. If you came in here with at least one negative behavior that you want to change, I guarantee you that that negative behavior is meeting at least 3 of those needs and at least at a level of 4 or 5. Many of times it will be higher than that, not always though. And so what that means is you've got one way of getting your needs met at a low level that makes you mad and upset with yourself. And you need to replace that with a positive addiction. You need to create a new behavior that you actually feel all of those needs are met by as well, but it's in the positive way. Because we can get our needs met in destructive ways or positive ways, right? And so that is the task at hand for you, is to figure out what is the behavior that you want to change it into and which behavior is going to meet your needs at a higher level. Hope that's helpful to you. If you would like assistance, again, go ahead and type session below. I'll reach out to you online via Messenger. We'll schedule a time. We'll set up a free 25-minute anxiety elimination coaching session for you to work on any of this or anything else you want help with. Or if you feel like you want to tackle this on your own, tune in with us live on Facebook Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I do these live streams every single week. Or we'll have it posted on YouTube on the following Friday and on our podcast the following Monday. If you'd like to book a session from YouTube or from the podcast, just go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. And also, if you'd like me to do a live stream on anything in particular, let us know in the comments. And hope you guys enjoyed this. Talk to you guys soon. Take care. Bye.